also the person bringing the Bible readings to worship this morning. So let's come together to hear from God's word. Reading from Luke chapter 13, verses 31 to 35. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He replied to them, "Go and tell that fox from me. Listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left here, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.' Your word, O Lord, is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path." Amen.
Thanks, Brad. Well, to be honest with you, I've sort of been wondering when the time might be right for me to preach the sermon that I'm going to preach today. I knew the time would be coming, but I just didn't quite know when might be the right time. And the lectionary readings matched up. So here you go. All right? Watch out. No, I'm not telling you to watch out. Look, this is my post-pandemic sermon. All right, this is what I want to say to you as we come out of the pandemic. Because we've lived in a space of uncertainty and fear and suspicion and a lack of trust and not really knowing what's going on for the last 2 years. We did the right thing as Corrimal Uniting Church. We played it safe. And as I said recently at the start of this year, even when other people didn't see the need for safety, we saw it. And we did for them what they wouldn't do for themselves. And we took the line of protection through vaccination. And through this time of COVID, and it's the same, I've sat in a number of ministers' circles now over the last 6 months or so. We're not the only church where this has happened or is happening. Where in the repeated opening, closing, lockdowns, things, the uncertainty, yes, we can start again, no, we can't, are we having morning tea, what's going on, who knows what. A number of churches have struggled. And in our own church, there are people who have had to stop coming, who at one point, well, because there were restrictions and we were forced to close, and then there have been other people who needed to stay away for their own safety. That they've got compromised immune systems. And there are some people who have stopped coming, who we may never see again, just because of the way the pandemic has played out, because it feels unsafe. I want to say to you, if you're listening in, some of those people we may never see again, either online or in person. Some people have come through the pandemic just tired or kind of have made an assessment that, church, I don't really need church that much anymore. We're not the only institution in the world that's feeling that. A lot of people have made a lot of decisions about their commitments in all sorts of places. But we have some who have moved online. So if you're viewing in today as someone who's moved online from coming face to face, I want to say this. We consider you to still be part of who we are. We still think of you. We still pray for you. We still speak your name kindly. So we want you to know you're still part of us, in whatever way that looks like. So we've kind of come through the pandemic in a way, and as I said, Omicron seems to have, come. There's going to be strains, there's going to be whatever, we'll probably, for the rest of your breathing days and probably of mine, there will be all kinds of different ways that this COVID virus will make little reappearances, all right? I think the Premier of New South Wales got into a bit of trouble, and just to try and sum up a little bit about where I think we are, got himself in a little bit of trouble because he called it maybe a fraction early, and the phrase he's become a little known for is let it rip. Open the doors, open the floodgates, just let it do what it's going to do. And it does sound a little uncaring, but I've got to say, I would not have wanted to have been a political leader of our nation or our state through this period we've come through. But it does seem like, at the moment, it seems fair to say that the worst part of COVID is over, and it does seem like that no one, as I'm going to borrow a word from Brad, which was that no political person, no person in politics who's making the laws or the restrictions or the guidelines is going to have an appetite to close down again. All right, they know the trouble that it causes. And whilst things stay in the space they're in, it looks like there won't be any more lockdowns. And in our community, things are open again. Like my local, I kind of got used to going round to Heaven down here, the coffee shop, and being able to, wait 3 minutes for a coffee. Well, now I've got to wait about 15 minutes some mornings because they're back open and going full bore. People are mingling. Businesses are back up. Sport has started again. Crowds are regathering. When it comes to businesses, we need to keep in mind that many businesses didn't make it through. And there are people who have lost livelihoods, they've lost their savings. There's a lot of people who are coming out the other end of this broken. So in public life, and again, as I said, we're not the only organisation to be going through this. The pandemic kind of took the sail out of a number of winds. It's stop-start nature, and all the responses that went on, the public health orders and the changes that went on all through, I think have worn people out. If you're feeling that, you wouldn't be Robinson Crusoe. I have felt that at times. I think it's left a lot of people feeling tired. And people have taken, it's been reported in a number of different places, that people are taking this time to reassess what they're part of, what they're going to be part of going forward. They're asking the question, maybe it's not as salient as this, but they're asking the question, what is life-giving that I want to go back to, and what's been draining that me not being part of they're not going to miss me. Or that I don't really, if that thing fell over, then that wouldn't be the end of the world. And for us as a church, as Corrimal Uniting, during the last 2 years, and there's been some other factors in this, so I don't want to make it sound like it's all about a pandemic, but we've seen some things close that were running 3 years ago or 4 years ago. We've seen some ministries stop. We've seen some ministries slow right down. We've significantly, and I'm going to name a couple of things, significantly our youth, the meeting part, the actual gathering part of our youth and children's ministries that's outward facing into the community over the last 3 or 4 years has folded. And it might cause, don't hear me saying, because we still have a youth and children's ministry thanks to some really dedicated people who still relationally catch up with people who aren't here in the room or don't come on Friday nights anymore because there is nothing to come to. But that has come to a kind of like a close as we knew it. And there would be people who would look around and say, well, goal number 1 should be to have children and youth in our church. I've been a youth worker. I was a youth worker before I was a deacon, and before I became your minister, I was an accredited youth worker in the church. And I'll tell you what, the number of times I've heard a congregation say we should have youth and children. Goal number 1 when they're doing a mission plan or any planning is we need to get more youth and children in the room. And then you ask them, well, what are you going to change to make that happen? and heads go down and fingers roll and, So, I'm not having a go at you. I'm just trying to say we're aware. And it might be something where you look around and say, well, where's this going from here? Numbers in worship are down, as I understand it. In the room, people... Now, let me just say, when you go home and look at YouTube and you look at the number of people who are participating in worship, and I want to say participating, not just viewing or watching. If you're online with us, I see you as a participant. You're part of who we are. And you look at the numbers there, and actually in some ways our numbers are a bit up. But in the room, on a Sunday morning at worship, given that we have folded 2 services into one, you might say our numbers are down. And that might cause you a little bit of angst. I want to say this about most of you. You know who you are if you don't fit into this category. A lot of you have been quite clean living through your lives. And that has meant that when you've hit your 70s and 80s, and even into your 90s, you probably appear much younger than the other 70 and 80 and 90-year-olds around you in the community, because you're also clean living, right? Isabel's question. Oh, Isabel might have a story or two to tell when you get out the door. But I have noticed there's a bit of a slowdown going on. I think COVID's kind of slowed a few things down. I feel it myself. I've had to kind of feel like it's taken me a while to start going again. So one approach to all of this, and it is a voice that's there about who we are, might be the leading voice, might be when you're talking amongst yourselves over coffee, or when you're in the car park, or when you're somewhere else, might be the leading voice of pessimism. And I get that. Things aren't what they used to be. And some of you will have come through times when the church was so much bigger. You might have come through times when Sunday school halls were full and people were meeting in the park. I've heard those kind of stories, of 30 classes and 90 teachers, and I've heard those kind of stories. And some of you will remember those days. Some of you might remember days a bit like I do, where going to church was still a thing. There was still, like the church where I grew up, it was pretty full. On a Sunday, it was a small church, but it was full. The building itself was small. The number of people involved in it was a lot. And I'm thankful for the upbringing I had in that church. But it's, like you will know those days. And the last 90 years has seen a massive decline in the number of people, if you look at the census figures, the number of people who either name themselves as Christian, who name themselves as being a church attender, and the number of people who are church participants, who are active in the life of their church. Those numbers have plummeted. And again, I say to you, your posture towards that might be pessimism. You might say, we're never going to get back there. And it's probably right. In our lifetime, and I include myself in this, I doubt we'll ever get back to those kind of days. We've gone from a time when our voice as the church was kind of central in public life. It would be, I say the shift was this, if you went to work on a Monday and you were standing around getting coffee or having a drink of water, the person who'd be standing there feeling a little uncomfortable, when you were talking about what you did on your weekend, the person who'd be feeling a bit uncomfortable was the person who kind of, everyone else, would be talking about their church stuff that they've been doing. Not everyone, but a lot of people. But the people who would feel uncomfortable and felt they had to come up with an excuse for what they did instead were the people who didn't go to church. These days, if you go to church, if you go to work on Monday and you stand around and you're in the kitchen or the water cooler, and you say, yeah, well, what did you do on your weekend? Well, I helped install the TV, or at my church, or I went to church on Sunday morning, and you're the one that's got to give reason for yourself. You're kidding me, really. You should try being a minister of religion. You should see conversations closed down. Really quick. If ever I've had enough of somebody, I try to steer them towards... I just steer them towards asking me what I do for a living. Conversation. So there was a time when our voice was central and we had a say in politics, we had a say in business, we had a say in all those kind of things. The church was always at the table, probably one of the key leaders. If ever the church wanted to bring a bill, the doors were wide open at Parliament. And our voice in the last 90 years, what the community hears from us, has gone from being central to being a minority voice on the edges. And I don't think the church has come to grips with that. I think a lot of people who lead the church, I mean all of us stacked in together as the homogenous church, I think there are people who still think our voice is received as the most important voice in the world. And they treat it that way. And then they get all upset when the community says, not listening, not listening, not listening. I rather suspect, and when I test this with people from outside the church, I get nods. But I rather it's because the church over the last 90 years has used its voice, and in some ways in recent times, as we've lost grip, we're kind of being heard to ramp this up a bit more. And no, we have no control over this, but how our voice is being heard as judgmental, as fear-ridden, as trying to drive people into a place of guilt, and of trying to control other people's lives. It's like we've only ever learned to interpret the gospel one way, and that's as a set of rules and boundaries for our own lives and for everybody else. The community, the wider community, has basically ditched us as part of the fabric of social life. I'm not saying it's all over Red Rover, but you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Is there anybody in the room that wants to contest this with me? No. We know. You know what I'm talking about. I'm singing to the choir, right? We know this. The community's ditched us. And a lot of people in the community haven't given up on the idea of being parts of community or parts of movements or parts of things that make and do good in the world. They've just given up on the church. And they left when they felt judged, or they left when they felt they were trying to be guilted into something. And they've moved into other movements or groups or communities of belonging and action, where their involvement is valued. And it doesn't matter who they are, they can come as they are and give. And they haven't felt like they've been able to do that in church. There are other people in the community who have moved into a space of indifference. And you say you go to church, or you say you're part of a church, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, that's... Don't get me wrong, there are some people in the community who get a sense of we're here to do good. And they know the bad name that is out there about the church doesn't apply to everybody. But they don't all get that. And there are many people who are quite indifferent to the church. You can say, oh yeah, well that's good. Nice. There are other people who know nothing about us. They don't know our story, they don't know our purpose, and they don't know why we're here. They've grown up in generation after generation now of not being part of any church, not having any affiliation with Christian people. It's sort of like this unchurched mass in Australia. There are many people have rejected us. And I've been talking about that. This idea, and actually downright rejected us for the holes in our theology. Because they've seen us as liars, because of all the scandals. They've rejected us because of our wealth, the church. So as I say, there's a sense in which pessimism might be our posture. I hope what I'm doing is just speaking truth to people who already understand that truth, but trying to make it a bit clear. I'm not having a go at you. I'm part of it as well. My livelihood comes from being part of the church. I'm invested here. I'm invested in you. I'm invested in me. I'm invested in God. I'm invested in the church. So please don't hear me saying this is all lost. And no, I don't look back at my own life and my own commitment to hearing the call of God in my life and acting. But if I was to ask the question, has it all been in vain? I'm hoping your own quiet whisper is no, because that's mine. If we think we lived in interesting times, Jesus also lived in interesting times. And I'm going to lean into Jesus now. I'm going to try and pull myself out of where we are, and I'm going to lean into Jesus, which hopefully you get from me every week. Jesus also lived in interesting times. And I don't think we'll ever fully understand just how difficult the times were in Jesus' times. But the overlay of it all was he was there in times of both political and religious oppression of the people for the benefit of a few. People were just seen as pawns in the game. And in our passage this morning, we get this sense that there are Pharisees who come to Jesus. Now, it's really, and I've been guilty of this in the past. I don't do it anymore, but I have been, it's almost like if you're at a pantomime and the villain comes on and you hear the da-da-da, and the villain comes on. Every time you hear the word Pharisee, the Pharisees must have been bad because they opposed Jesus. Well, here we have Pharisees. It's quite clear to see that there were Pharisees who kind of got it. They knew there was something going on in Jesus that was better and different to what they were already a part of. And there are Pharisees here who come to Jesus and they say, you're in danger. Herod is after you. So Herod, if you don't know, was the political leader. He was the governor of the region where Jesus was at the time. And they've come to Jesus. Now, it may be that they had a bit of selfish interest. It's hard to know. It might have been, we're going to be deemed as guilty by association. If you're hanging around where we hang around, then if Herod comes and you're here, it's going to be seen that we're here, and that's going to cause all sorts of trouble for us too. It might have been more like that. But it might have been that they could hear, that they could see a bigger picture of Jesus needing to be around for everything he was doing. And they came to Jesus and said, it's not safe here, you need to move on. Find somewhere else to go, to hide perhaps, for his own protection. What is Jesus' response? Because that's what I want to pick up on today. When things are really tough, when the powers that be are against you, when the people are against you, and that comes up in the reading, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the number of times I've tried to come to you with a gentle word, the number of times I've tried to come to you with a prophetic word, to lead you away from the trouble you are in, the number of times you have rejected me. Does that sound like our times? It does a bit to me. That our word into our community is falling on deaf ears. Jesus is saying here, these are tough times. The political leader is against him. The people aren't interested. What does he say? What can we find as a way, as a posture back into our context out of what Jesus says? And Jesus leads with compassion. Okay, he's got a harsh word for Herod to start out with. He calls him a fox, all right? In other words, he's saying, I've got guts here. I'm standing up to this. I'm going to be resistant. But then he leads with compassion. And he refers to himself as being like a mother hen. I want to gather you up like a mother hen gathers her brood. Jesus stays resilient. He stays focused. I've got a purpose here. I've got healing to do. I've got teaching to do. I've got prophecy to give. He leads with compassion. And finally, he's committed. Basically, he says, I don't care what goes on around me. This day, tomorrow, and the next, I am going to keep on being and doing who I am. No matter how tough life is around me, I'm going to keep going. I know what I'm here for. I'm not going to get distracted, and I'm going to keep at it. Today, tomorrow, and the next. Friends, I don't know about you, but that's the vision I have for us. We're living in difficult times. There's no doubt about it. Things have shifted. Things have changed. Now, we can fall in a pothole, and there's plenty of them to fall into at the moment, but you could fall into a pothole of despair. But I want to follow in the way of Jesus. And I'm inviting you to do the same as me. I'm inviting you in these difficult times to hold to who we are, to be resilient, to not give up, to know why we're here, to be focused, to know why we're here, and to lead with compassion. To lead with compassion. I think that's one of the most important parts of Jesus' ministry that we've lost in there somewhere. Some people think when you're a follower of Jesus, you have to lead with, I don't know, all kinds of different things. But the people came to Jesus because of his compassion. Not just because he could do tricks of healing or teaching or prophecy, but because when you hear it over and over again, that he could see the people and his heart was touched. He wanted to do something about it. Jesus always led with compassion. And my own hunch is that in these times, if we're going to be a good presence in our local community, compassion is a good place to start. That will show us where we need to love when we start with compassion. And friends, let's continue to be committed. Now, we are already doing this. I want to remind you that right through this pandemic, as much as we could, the men's shed has been open. Ends meet has met and been community. I want to remind you that Living English has continued to run as much as it could through the pandemic. I want to remind you that the op shop has continued to be open and met people in need in our local community. I want to remind you that we have other groups that have continued to meet as often as soon as they could get back to it and it felt safe. Time Out, some of our Bible study groups, some of our prayer groups have all either formed or reformed in a different way. I want to remind you that we've got new ministries that are starting to get started again. So we've got a men's group that Mark's leading. Mark Beaton is leading. We're going to start back up again with our youth and young adults on the 26th. There are other ideas bubbling away on the table, which will give us an opportunity to lead with compassion in our local community, to be resilient, to be focused, to not lose sight of why we're here. You know, friends, with all that's going on, and I'm sorry today's sermon's been a bit longer, I do apologise. But I'm finishing up now. This was the one I wanted to give when we came out of the pandemic. sort of came out of the pandemic. When we came out of the worst of the pandemic, this is what I wanted to be able to say to you. Is there's a risk that we will fall into pessimism. And I can't tell you what to feel. Just because I've preached what I think is a fairly good sermon, you may still feel uncertain. You may still feel like there's a lot of things to lose. You may still feel like, actually when I was mentioning the new things we've started, the Exploring Our Faith is another one as well. But you may still feel like, oh gosh, I'm only just hanging in here. And I want to say, if that's you, then please, please keep just hanging in with us. Because we're taking the pathway of compassion. We're taking the pathway of love. And I can't tell you what to feel. I can't tell you what to think. But I'm telling you that I do believe this is the way of Jesus. It's the way of love. It's the way that transforms lives. Friends, it's the way we're going. And if I hear Jesus at all, I want to say, this is the way that is forwards. I'm going to ask a question. This is not my usual mode of operation. Asking questions is, but what I'm about to do is not. But I'm going to invite you. I'm taking a risk. But I'm going to ask you to stand. I'm going to ask you to stand if you want to go forwards. If you're able, I should have said. Thank you, my friends. Thank you. I really, warms my heart. I feel the Spirit in the room. I think we've got a fairly good grasp of who we are and why we're here. Let's keep following in the way of Jesus. Let's keep continuing to let the Spirit move through us in this particular way. Amen. Thank you. You can be seated.